If you have good personal contacts, you will have an advantage over those who don't.
But one of the reasons we work in our local community and beyond our local community is in exactly that, to get a better understanding and to enable students applying to get the experience.
I have come across scores of students who have been in touch with me, and they have written perhaps to half a dozen hospitals trying to get work experience, and very often their letters haven't been answered.
If medicine has a long way to go, then it's only part of a pattern repeated across the traditional professions. Lawyers administer justice for us all, but the profession is hardly representative of the wider community. 7 in 10 judges and 6 in 10 barristers went to independent schools.
I accept that the public perception of barristers is of a privileged profession who are drawn from a small section of society. I think that's absolutely right. When I chaired the bar, the choice of new barristers was made by small sets of chambers who weren't trained in personnel procedures and in good diversity practice. And I thought a lot of access problems needed to be addressed.
So in 2007, the Bar Council, the barristers' governing body, commissioned a report to look at how to make joining the profession fairer. And this is it, the Neuberger report, and it had 57 recommendations. And its key points were broadening access and improving recruitment, because those are the areas they accept they were getting wrong.
This is the Bar Council's Equality Committee. For its members, the challenge is how to achieve that wider access without compromising standards.
We only interview people who have got a 2-1 or above. And that's a commercial decision, because we'd be interviewing forever if we didn't have that criteria.
When you come from a background where nobody has been to university, where the best that people have achieved is possibly staying on for their A-levels, to do A-levels is a heck of achievement for somebody like that.
I'm not entirely sure it's fair to sit there and say, I'm going to hold it against you just because ostensibly on paper you did go to Oxbridge or to a public school.
If someone's been to a lousy bog standard comp, they've obviously had to have been a great deal better to get into a particular university than someone who's been to a very privileged public school where success is the norm.
Barristers now get training to avoid favouring candidates better placed to tick all the boxes. And more than 1,000 barristers now go into state schools each year to demystify the profession for students. But changing the profile of a profession takes time. This is the Young Barristers' annual gathering. Look around and you can see the bar has recruited more women and more ethnic minorities. But the social barriers remain.
I went to a very modest fee-paying school in Norfolk. I grew up in Norfolk. Then I went to Oxford to read English.
My dad was a barrister. I used to travel to court with him, and so became interested from that stage.
It's really funny. I seem to have weeks where I do just prosecution and weeks where I do just defence.
I went to school in Forest Gate, which is in Newham. I then went to Walthamstow to Sixth Form College and to Queen Mary University. In terms of how typical I am, whilst there are people with a background like mine, it's relatively unusual.
Money is one of the biggest barriers to widening access. It costs £15,000 to study for bar exams on top of a degree.
The higher those costs become, the higher that barrier is and the bigger the loans end up being. And that, in my opinion, is the single biggest thing which prevents people accessing the bar.
So it seems to get a top job, you increasingly need to be well off, have good contacts and be able to work for free. And that's not many of us.
We've now got a position where tomorrow's professional is growing up in a family that is richer on average than 7 in 10 families in our country. That means that some middle-class kids, as well as working-class kids, are being denied opportunities that should be open to them.
The former Labour Health Secretary, Alan Milburn, is a dedicated champion of fair access to the professions. His report, Unleashing Aspiration, compiled for Labour, looked at how we might improve the situation. And then the coalition government surprised the political world by appointing him as its social mobility czar.
You're now part of a new government.
He said seamlessly.
Yeah, you were in one and now you're in another one. Why on earth did you sign up with the coalition?
I'm very surprised that the government has agreed to it, because everybody knows my views.
Those views on social mobility were formed by Milburn's childhood in the northeast.
Right, okay, so that's not well, this is where I grew up as a teenager, at the end of the 60s, early 70s, so it's got lots of memories.
His journey from Newcastle Back Street to high political office was made during the golden age of social mobility.
When we moved here, it was a very run-down area. It wasn't a glamorous place to grow up.
This is
this is actually where I grew up. Yeah. It's what's known as a Tyneside flat. So we lived upstairs.
What made you become what you are from this street?
In an area like this, there was, lots of poverty and all that stuff. What you didn't have, I don't think, is two separate worlds. You didn't have one society here, mainstream, and another society separated from the rest. And so there was a way of being able to get out. So for me, it never felt like you couldn't make your way in the world. It didn't mean working your way to the top, but you could become part of the mainstream.
So in those places there was a sense of a ladder. You might be on the bottom rung, but there was a ladder.
There was definitely a ladder.
Back then, O-levels were usually enough to get you into an office job on the bottom rung, and after that, anything was possible.
Morning, can I help you?
People left school at 15, 16 and got work. There were jobs in banks and so on. There was a whole range of things you could do. A small number of people went to university, but that's gone.
When Alan Milburn was a young man, Newcastle was an industrial powerhouse. Swan Hunter alone employed over 12,000 at shipyards. But in the 80s, Britain's manufacturing industries disintegrated.
Well, this is the home of shipbuilding in the heart of Newcastle, and I suppose when I was growing up as a kid, if you didn't have an education qualification, nonetheless, these sort of jobs provided you with an opportunity to get on the employment ladder.
So if you didn't go the academic route...
If you didn't go the academic route, you could get a job here. Yeah. Now look at it, it's all disappeared. I think the great thing about a place like Swan Hunters was you could start at the bottom, serve your apprenticeship, learn your trade, do your time, and move on up and stay there for life.
But if they're good at their job now, won't they rise through as they would have done here 20, 30 years ago?
Nowadays, the gap between the people who go down the so-called vocational route and the people who go down the qualification route is so vast. So you've got a segregated labour market, divided between the haves, who've got a qualification, and the have-nots.
Our party is the party of equality of opportunity.
The 80s saw an hourglass economy emerging, with unskilled workers trapped at the bottom, rich pickings at the top, and a collapsing ladder between the two.
That ain't working. That's the way you do it. Money for nothing and your chicks for free.
In 5 years' time, I'll have made a fortune, and that's what I want.
The number of people out of work has gone up sharply to a new record level. More than 3,340,000 people are on the dole.
It was a key moment, a fork in the road. Those with good jobs could provide more for their families. The rest were left behind. In the 80s, the gap between rich and poor widened by 60%.
That's the largest increase on record. And economic inequalities, large differences between the rich and the poor, work against social mobility. The social distance between those at the bottom and the top is far too great. It's like a chasm between people.
These 1950s babies were born into the golden age of social mobility. If you were born to an average family in 1958, you were more likely to get a job in the professions when you grew up than if you arrived in the world just 12 years later in 1970. That steady decline has continued to this day. But not everyone blames external forces. Some believe the economic divide has far less impact on where we end up than raw natural intelligence.
My basic argument on the basis of the evidence that I've looked at is that if you're bright and motivated, if you work hard, then you will be to a large extent successful, almost irrespective of what kind of family you came from.
In this country, the top jobs seem to be dominated by those people who've been to private school. Well, why is that?
Because of the ability distribution.
So people
there is an ability distribution across the social classes.
There's less ability at the bottom of the social classes.
On average, you will find the ability level of the children being born into middle-class homes is higher, and that is what's driving the difference in occupational outcomes between the classes.
A lot of people are going to find that very hard to stomach,
and I'm one of them. Yeah, they're going to find it absolutely obnoxious.
But it's this genetic element that somehow those people at the bottom of our society produced offspring that are not capable of rising to the top.
No,
I don't think that's the case.
Many people in the lower positions in the society produce children who are bright, and those children rise. But on average, you will find the ability level of the children being born into middle-class homes is higher, and that is what's driving the difference in mobility outcomes.
If the children of the rich are cleverer, then surely poor children will struggle to climb up the career ladder in every society. But not all countries are like this one. Amongst developed countries, we have one of the poorest levels of social mobility.
The latest research suggests that here in Britain, only about half of your earning power is down to your effort. The other half is down to the start you get in life. Now, in other countries where the gap between rich and poor is narrower, then things are different. There, about 20% of your income is down to your background, 80% is down to your effort.
It's no coincidence that the societies that are most mobile, some of the Scandinavian societies or countries like Australia, they're more mobile because they're more equal. So fairness and aspiration, these two things actually go together.
Over 15 years of doing research with working class young people and families, there's not a dearth of aspiration. That's not the problem. It's having adequate resources and knowledge to put those aspirations into practice, to be able to realise them.
Carmarthenshire in South Wales. A reunion of Llandilo Grammar School's class of 61. All clever baby boomers who passed their 11 plus.
I came to Llandilo